So why are we here? I think about 18 months, 2 years ago, I could have done the whole of this community-led housing conference with you in about 20 minutes, because that would have covered everything I ever knew about community-led housing. We had one very early project in Hudswell that you're going to hear about, and really not very much else, particularly in our rural patches. So fast forward 6 months, and we did some work through the Nationwide Foundation to identify 12 pilots, which we managed, which we weren't sure that we would. And then fast forward another 12 months, and we received from communities and local government across all the local authorities, except for York, an allocation of the Community Housing Fund. And so we've been able to keep some of that momentum going. And now across the patch we have about 25 fledgling community housing groups, all at various stages of the process, all fairly early on in the process, but nevertheless at an early stage. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on to Zoe from Locality, which is a national organisation who support community groups to do all sorts of different things, and Zoe leads on their community-led housing programme.
Okay, hello everyone. So I'm from Locality. We're a charity. We're a national charity and a membership organisation. So we have 600 members around the country, and about 10% of those, about 60 of them, do really innovative community-led housing projects. And our mission really is to support community-led organisations to be successful. We do that through hands-on support. We run contracts, things like the neighbourhood planning support and advice service for central government. We do a lot of peer support and networking to get our members together to share learning. We also do a lot of lobbying for government as well, taking evidence from our members to help try and get a better policy environment for our members. And then we also provide a lot of tools and resources as well. So in terms of what is community-led housing, there really is a broad range of things going on, and these are just examples of 3 of our members. So the top left one is a self-build project in Hull by a member called Gyroscope. And I think a lot of people think of self-build as just sort of individuals doing it for themselves, but this is a project that's actually building affordable housing for rent, communities building housing for other members of the community. The top right is Lilac in Leeds. That's an example of a new build scheme, which is a co-housing scheme. So everyone has their individual homes, but they're perhaps smaller than, say, your average house, because there's lots of communal spaces. So it's about building communities where different families are supporting each other. And then we have Canopy in Leeds as well, which is an example of refurbishing empty homes for rent, but doing lots of employment and training initiatives with long-term unemployed people. So that's just sort of a few examples. And groups can tackle or get into community-led housing in different ways. So we find a lot of groups set up from scratch, so new projects. And that might be coming through from neighbourhood planning groups who create a neighbourhood plan and then want to actually enact that plan and do some housing. We actually have a lot of members that actually start doing something else and then go into planning, and I think Hudswell's an example of that. They took over their local community pub and then decided to get into housing as well. And then we have groups that work in partnership with housing associations. So those that were there here this morning, we had some housing associations talking about how you can work in partnership. And this is an example of a community organisation in Leicester that managed to get some or negotiate some free land from the council through a community asset transfer, and then built 68 new homes that the housing association now manage for them. So in terms of sort of definition of community-led housing, we've been working with other sort of national sector leaders like the Community Land Trust Network, the Confederation of Cooperative Housing and the UK Co-Housing Network to actually try and put a definition together. And actually, it's quite hard because of the variety, and it's the diversity that is really the strength of what community-led housing is all about. So really, we came up with some sort of core principles, and it's really about sort of meaningful community engagement throughout the process. Communities don't have to manage a development process, but often they do, and they manage the build process as well. But the key things is it's about really the community organisation either owning or managing or stewarding those affordable homes in perpetuity, really. So it's important that that affordable housing is locked with an asset lock, so it can't get sold on, and it remains that benefit for the community forever. We also say that community can be both a place or a community of interest as well. So we work with older people's groups. We work with a group in London, a sort of a lesbian co-housing group. So we do lots of different communities of interest as well. The most important thing is that those community groups are open to anyone that would like to join them. So open membership. So we've been doing a lot of support work with community-led housing groups. So I thought it'd be worth just talking about what we think the conditions are for success to take forward new community-led housing projects. And we think one of the key ones is about having access to quality, consistent advice and information. There's lots of different housing models out there, and so it's really important when new groups, if you're starting up a new group, that you get that advice that doesn't have any bias about a typical model, so that you can actually really understand what your community needs, and perhaps do some research into all the different types of models out there, and decide what's best for your community. So it might be a cooperative housing, it might be a co-housing project, it could be mixed tenures, it could have all sorts of elements to it. It might have shared workspace within it, for example. So lots of different routes and ways to do it, and we think having that sort of unbiased advice is really important. So one of the projects we've done that was funded through the Nationwide Foundation as well is that we've been working with over 20 early stage support groups, and that's been fantastic. So what we've done is we've worked with those groups to give them basically partner them up with mentors, so other practitioners from our membership who have been there, done it, have become experts, and so we enable sort of peer support to happen through this project, and then we commission sort of expert community-led housing consultants from a panel to come in and support them as well. And one of the most important things, again, that we found from that is that form follows function. So understanding what you want to do, creating that outline business plan before you become incorporated. So then you can understand really what your most appropriate legal structure is. And I think Wrigley's will be talking a bit more about that. So we go in and do that early support and then help them to then connect up with people like Wrigley's to actually incorporate as a legal entity itself. This project or this programme can work really well. We get commissioned by local authorities to deliver the early stage support programme in different areas. One example is Chichester down south, and that's worked really well because the programme works alongside rural housing enablers. So we have the sort of expert practitioners from a membership come in, work with the rural enablers so that they can develop up their skills and knowledge as well, and also work with other sort of local infrastructure bodies as well. So it can be a great way of bringing capacity from around the country in and really giving a kickstart to community-led housing within an area. So if we're a charity, we have to get funding to do these kind of schemes, but we would love to do something like that in your area if possible. In terms of having sort of consistent and quality advice, we run a website called mycommunity.org.uk, which has lots of free resources on there. So we have 4 community-led housing toolkits, and we've got a stall at the back if people want to pick up one of those. So that can really help in terms of how you set up a new group, how you access funding. So please have a look at that website as well. Another condition of success, I think, is about having networks of enabler services within an area. So it's great that your area it has got this new community-led housing hub, and when we've seen this work really well in other places, it's about really looking and seeing what existing skills are there within the community-led housing sector. And we've got some great members within our area, people like Goodwin Development Trust in Hull, who are fantastic. They do a lot of work with our other members, helping groups become a registered provider if they want to become that. And so really building on the skills that are already within an area. We also think peer support is really important. We can't sort of emphasise enough how much you can get from that. So if you've got community-led housing groups that would like to join locality, we have regular get-togethers where all the sort of innovative community-led housing projects get together and learn from each other. The picture there was of our latest meeting in Birmingham, and Pete from Goodwin Development Trust was actually talking to other groups about how he managed to negotiate a really low interest loan from Hull City Council. So he was talking to other groups about how they can look into prudential borrowing. So it's that kind of innovative project that we share and help other groups to do similar things as well. And we often move around the country showcasing community-led housing projects as well. Another condition for success is around neighbourhood planning. Often in the past, local communities would not be keen on new housing developments, that sort of NIMBY issue. But actually, through neighbourhood planning, because it gives the power for communities to decide the type of housing they want, it actually can bring more housing forward because communities can actually say, actually, we need smaller units, we need affordable housing, we need housing for older people, or new starter homes to keep sons and daughters or teachers within their village, within their community. So we help groups to do neighbourhood planning, and there's a lot of support around there to look at how neighbourhood plans can lead to community-led housing as well. So again, if you're thinking about a neighbourhood plan or involved with one and would like some advice about how that can lead on to community-led housing, then please get in touch with us. Again, on the My Community website, there's loads of resources around neighbourhood planning. So we've got guides on how to do housing needs assessments, how to do site assessments, look at viability, how to use community right to build orders. So lots of different specific tools that might be useful when you get to that stage. We also run the neighbourhood planning grants programme for central government. So if groups want to do neighbourhood plans and are allocating sites for housing, there's up to £15,000 available through grant funding to help you look at that. Another condition for success is around making sure that you have funding available to take your projects forward. And so we've been doing a lot of lobbying with local government, again in partnership with some of the sort of key community-led housing groups, to look at how the community housing fund should be spent moving forward. So there's 60 million a year over 5 years, and we're in the second year now, but the government hasn't yet said how that money is going to be spent. So we've been doing a lot of lobbying, the housing minister, and we've been talking about that actually it would be great if that community housing fund would be made available to the whole of England. At the moment, it's only available to areas with high second home ownership, but a lot of areas in your region are covered by that. But we want to get that expanded to all areas, and also to cover both new build housing and refurbished housing as well, because we think that actually there's housing is needed, affordable housing is needed everywhere, and we've got lots of members and lots of groups that could be delivering it if they widen the criteria. And just finally to say, we also run a grant programme for Department of Communities and Local Government. So if you're a community-led housing project, you can access up to £50,000 to do pre-feasibility work to get you to planning permission stage. again, if you look at the My Community website, that has information about that grant funding. We found out last week that DCLG won't be rerunning this programme again next year. I think partly probably to do with the Community Housing Fund. So if you have got a site and you're an incorporated community-led housing group and you would like to access either a £10,000 pre-feasibility grant or then go on to get a £40,000 project support grant, you've got up until January to apply, although we would recommend putting in applications by Christmas, but then you'd only have sort of 3 months to spend it. So if you are a project and you think you might be eligible, have a look, please have a word with me, and we can see if we can get you some funding to help you take your project forward. So we do have a stall at the back. Please come and say hello. I could talk to you about locality membership or about any of the grant funding or other resources that we have available. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Zoe. Now we're going to hear a little bit more of a local picture from Leah Swain. Leah's the Chief Executive of Community First Yorkshire, formerly known as Rural Action Yorkshire.
Smashing. Good afternoon. It's great to see so many people in the room interested in community-led housing. So I'm going to take you from the kind of national support offer down to the very local support offer. I'll be talking mainly about North Yorkshire, which is the patch I'm operating in. But if you are from East Riding, then Peter's here from Humber and Wolds RCC. Where are you, Peter? He's there, look, hiding at the back. And he'll be able to advise from an East Riding perspective. So Community First Yorkshire, we're a rural community council. There's 38 rural community councils across England, and we're the one for North, South and West Yorkshire. We're an independent charity, and we work to ensure that rural communities have equitable access to services and facilities just like their urban counterparts. The types of work we're interested in is the rollout of rural broadband, making sure that we all have access to superfast. We're interested in increasing services and activities for all ages in villages and market towns. We're interested in supporting village halls and other community buildings or community organisations, and we're very much interested in ensuring that every village and town across our rural areas have access to affordable housing, but high quality affordable housing where people genuinely want to live and the community has an invested interest in. So we worked with Sarah over the last year to increase the awareness of community-led housing. So when we started the project, we'd go out to communities and say, have you ever heard of community-led housing? And it was very few that had. By the end of that year, we feel, Sarah, that a lot more communities now know a little bit more about community-led housing, and we're certainly seeing more communities coming forward to talk to us about community-led housing. Forgot to do that. I've got a definition of community-led housing. I did say to Zoe at the beginning, I bet our definitions are different. They are just about similar, so we're on the same page. The definition is very much that the community is in the lead. This is about a community deciding what it wants built in its village, how it's going to manage that building work, how they're going to allocate those homes to local people and local residents, and what the rents will be or how they decide to sell those houses. The community has to stay in the lead, and it has to be the group that's making the decisions. We're very keen that the homes will obviously remain in community ownership. It's not just about building for now, it's building for the next 100 years or so. So we're looking for communities with that long-term vision. And it's not just about the parish council or the town council. They're a really important part of this, but it's about the whole community buying into wanting more affordable housing in their community. So who could take the schemes forward? I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail because I think Zoe's done a good job explaining there's all sorts of ways you can start a community-led housing scheme. But the types of things we're seeing, sometimes you get a group of interested people. I'm catching a few eyes in the room because there are groups of interested people here today. And those people have come together and said, do you know what, I've got family, I've got friends, I've got neighbours, and they can't afford to buy or rent quality accommodation in this village. They're having to travel a long way to get to their jobs, and they're not living with their families and friends. And those people want to do something. So it might start with that kind of community activist feel to it. It might be, and there's a few land agents in the room, I'm I can see a few. It might be that a landowner has a piece of land and they might be struggling to get the community in to engage with planning permission on that land, or to see that it's a benefit to their community if they want to develop it. Perhaps there's a conversation to be had between a community group and a landowner, and we've got a few of those conversations going on at the moment. Or it might be that someone has a piece of land and decides that they have very altruistic reasons for wanting communities to build on that land. So it can come from all sorts of areas. The one question I'm asked whenever I go and see a town council, a community group, or a parish council is, why should we bother, Leah? You know, it sounds like a hell of a lot of work, and there's bound to be people that don't want new housing. Why would we put all this effort in? There are many good reasons for taking on a community-led housing scheme. The first is that although many of us in the room may own our own houses, we may be in the fortunate position of being able to live where we want, there are plenty of people, friends and neighbours and other parts of our families that can't afford to live in the villages that they want to live in or the towns they want to live in. We have different generations who view home ownership very differently. So when I've been talking to town councils and parish councils, a few of them say, well, why would we bother building rented accommodation? Everybody wants to own their own house. It's about buying your own house. Actually, it's not. And I think James will be expressing some opinions about that later. Some people just want to know that they can have good quality, affordable rented accommodation. They can send their child to school and know that in 6 months their tenancy won't come up for renewal. They know that if they need to adapt that housing for their own needs, that they can adapt it and live there for a long time. It's about knowing that a community cares about their residents and wants them to live somewhere that they can stay for some time. A more interesting argument, perhaps for some parish councils, is it's a good income generator. You're going to be building an asset that will last your community for many hundreds of years. So once you've paid off your mortgages, and do talk to Jeremy about mortgages, once you've paid off the mortgage on those properties or paid back your loans, or hopefully not if you've got massive grants, but you don't know what your model's going to look like, you will then collect the rent on that accommodation. And that rent might pay for social care in your village. It might pay to keep your community building running. It might pay to keep your shop or your pub open. So it's really important to think of this as a really long-term positive action for your community. It's also about keeping your village alive. I live in a very small hamlet. A family hasn't moved into our village since I moved in, so that's a good 14 years, and I can't see any young families moving into that village in the foreseeable future because of the price of housing. That means we have an ageing population in our village. It means there's many villages out there that will no longer be able to keep their schools open, their pubs open, their shops open, their post offices open. We need to keep villages moving. We need to keep them looking different. We need to keep building in villages, and we need to bring new blood into villages if we're to keep them surviving as proper rural communities. And the best reason for doing this now, that I say to parish councils and town councils and any other group, is that there is so much help available. Me and Sarah are always slightly astonished by the amount of support that has suddenly materialised for community-led housing, and it's amazing. So you've got the district councils, many of whom are in the room, who've got their community housing fund allocation, and they have allocations that they need to spend in the next couple of years. You've got a long-term community housing fund that's being managed, Zoe mentioned it, and wherever that's managed, whichever organisation looks after it, district councils, local authorities, any of the big national charities, there's still money there for the next 3 to 5 years that you can access for grants for helping with your capital build. I guess here's the chance to give a plug for Community First Yorkshire. We're also supporting every local community across North Yorkshire that wants to take forward community-led housing. So you might want to know, well, we've got this group, we're thinking of setting up, what sort of governance structure do I need? Do I need to be a community land trust, a community benefit society? We're thinking of community shares, what sort of structure should it be? So we've got James at the office that can come out and advise or give you advice on the phone. We've got people that can help you with your funding applications, signpost you to the right people, and tell you when's a good time to bring in the expert specialists that you can get through the hub, which Rob's going to speak about later. You've got the national offer from locality. Don't panic if you can't get the applications in for January. There is grants available through the district councils as well for that pre-feasibility work, so do plan that through. And then you've got other national organisations which I've listed up there, and you'll get the slides after the event. So you've got the Community Land Trust network. If you go down the Community Land Trust route, you might think about co-housing. Co-housing is really interesting if you've got a community where lots of people need to downsize, for example, or do you have a community with lots of young people who might like to live in small clusters with some shared space. They've got some really interesting ideas at the network. And then you've got funders such as Charity Bank, Key Fund, and others who are there to help make up the kind of loan element of your capital funding. Ooh, that's an interesting slide, isn't it? Nice bushy. So what I would say to anyone who's even got the slightest interest in community-led housing, whether you're a landowner and land agent, a community, an individual, is now is the best time to try and take forward community-led housing for your community. So if you get a chance, come and speak to me or Peter and we'll give you the kind of local support available, or to one of the RHEs. Thank you.
Maybe not. Okay, so today, so my name's James Newton. I'm here. I've got two hats on today, a bit of an identity crisis. I'm a designer at Native Architects, but I'm also a co-founder and a hopeful resident member of Your Space Community-Led Housing. And we are a community-led housing project based in York, so an urban environment, as Sarah said. And we're a group that are committed to building environmentally sustainable homes that are community-focused, but they're also low-cost and cooperatively owned. And that's our vision as a community. We want to build homes that are sustainable and affordable long term. So we're working. So that's a group. We're 60 plus members at the moment. We have a group of about 10 of us that are working on the project full time, and we're also working with other partners. So Wrigley Solicitors, Coho, and Native Architects are part of that team that are helping deliver our project. So where did our project start? So a couple of times Lilac has been mentioned. So Lilac is a project in Leeds. It stands for Low Impact Living Affordable Community, and this is what inspired me. It's inspired a lot of our members. This is a project that has built 20 straw bale homes, and this is the thing that got me hooked because I'm really interested in sustainable construction. So I was really interested in a whole housing estate made of straw, but then I got really interested in understanding more about what community housing is. So we've touched upon community housing a little bit. This is a diagram from the UK Co-Housing Network. Co-housing it's not a commune. You have your own house, you've got your own bathroom, you've got your own kitchen. There's lots of misconceptions about what co-housing is, but the way I like to think of it is that it's housing plus. You get all these extra benefits. You've got all this extra space. So the common house, which is that building in the centre, that's the key component of community housing. That's a place where people come together to share meals, watch films together, and you really build that sense of community. And it's something that I hadn't thought about before, but it's something that I'm currently experiencing where I live in York. So I'm incredibly fortunate to live on the street that I live on in York. You knock on the door and these people come out and they become friends. And as a person who really enjoys a street party, they're great. And this is the kind of space that we created on our street. We're very fortunate. We live on a dead-end street, so we're quite fortunate in that respect. But it's a great community space. Space for people to be together with their neighbours. And now I would love to live on that street long term. But like most people my age, I can't afford to live there, and that's predominantly to do with the disproportionate rise in house and land prices to salaries. So focusing specifically on York, between 1997 and 2013, average house prices went from £80,000 to £200,000, and during that time salaries pretty much stayed the same. Fast forward now to 2017, the average house price is about £246,000, average salary is £24,000, so we've got houses that are 10 times the average salary for people in the city. Coupled in the fact that I'm part of this generation rent. I'm living in rented accommodation, and 2/3 of renters can't afford to buy, can't afford to save up their money for a deposit because house rents are so high. So this is an issue not just for me, for many people, and this is what's fueling the housing crisis. And I think we need a new approach. We need a new way to diversify housing delivery. And so this is where I think community-led housing and co-housing initiatives where people take control of their own housing can really make a difference. So this is how our model works. So Your Space, we are a community benefit society. We are effectively a community not-for-profit housing developer. And the model is that taking in support from the local community, local investors, and then future residents, the future residents contribute to the society. We are basically finding land, buying it, building homes, and then giving them to communities at cost. It's completely not for profit. And the idea is that then the people that take on those communities set up cooperatives to own those homes. So just to explain the model of the cooperatives, this is an awful slide and I don't expect you to absorb it, but what it does is it proves that it's a real thing. Mutual home ownership, it's a complex model, but basically how it works is that because the issue is that we don't have a lot of low-cost housing, if we're going to build low-cost housing with the model that we're doing with our Community Benefit Society, we need to make sure that they stay affordable long-term. And the way that this model works is that people that buy in, they don't own their homes directly, but they own the company that owns their home, and along with their neighbours. And the deal is that you accrue equity in that development over time. So you pay your monthly amount, and as you accrue equity, if you ever want to leave, that's fine. The deal is that you have to sell your shares back to the co-op. And then the co-op then refinances, and then the incoming members take on that cost. So what it does is it recycles that affordability. So these houses don't find their way onto the open market. If we build them low cost now, in 10 years' time, they can't be sold off for $1 million. What it does is it's an antidote, in my mind, to the right to buy. It's a really good model to ensure that these houses stay affordable long term. Hopefully that was well explained. One of the key things to that, and this will bring me on to the first site I want to talk about, is access to land and access to low-cost land. This is from an article that was around in 2015. We believe that we can fix the housing crisis if there's a good access to land. Not free land, just fairly priced land. So this is a site that we looked at in the centre of York. This is in Bishop Hill. It was a council-owned site. We felt approaching the council was our best bet to access land at an affordable rate. It was put out for an informal tender, so we effectively entered a bidding war. This is it wasn't a looker. It wasn't a looker, but we had plans to try and apply our model here. And we kind of ended up campaigning by accident. We didn't set out to be local pressure group Your Space, as we were once dubbed in the press. We went to the local community and asked them, what would you want to do with this building? And we got lots of community support. We ran a couple of public meetings. We asked people what they wanted there. And we got a lot of support. The press got behind us. They were really interested in the model that we were proposing. So we drummed up a lot of momentum with this particular project. So this is the plans for the project. We were going to maintain the building. It made no environmental sense to knock that building down. We were going to convert it. It was an elderly people's home, so there was lots of infrastructure in it already to turn it into housing. We were going to build 14 low-cost homes. They were all going to be cooperatively owned under the model that I said before. There was going to be a common house building, which was going to be a central hub, not just for the community, but not just for the residents, but for the wider community. There was also a community allotment in the top right-hand corner here. There was a community allotment on site that was being used by local residents just to grow a bit of food. And we liked that idea, so we took that idea and said, well, let's build on that. So the plan was to also incorporate 4 new community allotments for the wider community. We also had ideas of creating a community compost point, cycle and tool storage. We really wanted to have that as a resource, not just, we want it to be an outward-looking community. So this was the vision that people got behind. And just to reference the community allotments again, what we tried to say to the council was that type of community value should be prioritised higher than capital value. The way that this building was marketed was, the way that the bids were assessed were on the basis that 60% was capital value, 20% was deliverability, and 20% was community value. Now, we won hands down on community value, but unfortunately, reality hit home. And in 2015, mid-2015, the council opted not to take our offer. We absolutely understood the decision. We understand the pressure that the council are under. We were disappointed, but we understood. And we felt to us like it wasn't a good sign. It really felt like that we weren't being heard. But to be fair to the council, they did commit at the decision session that they announced the sale of this property. They did say that they would commit to find us an alternative site, which brings us on to this site. So this site I'm particularly excited about. This is the 5th site that we've looked at now as a community group. It's a council-owned land. It's in Acombe. It's a former school site. It's part of a wider development. They're building a care home, a police centre. There's lots more housing. There's a community village green. There's some self-built plots. And we were invited to put forward a proposal for this site to check whether it was viable for us as a community group. We've been looking at this now for around about 12 months. We've had lots of public meetings. We've engaged the wider community. we've tried to just test our model really on that. So we've been working up our business model. Because the council have prioritised this land for us, we have 12 months, we have a deal for 12 months to raise the funding and get planning permission. And without that input, without the council preserving that site for us, our model wouldn't work. So it's really, really good that we've been supported in this way. So, and it's just a point to say here around about funding and how we've managed to achieve that. So up until Oliver House, we had lots of very, very generous consultants that were giving their time free to help with us. But there is funding pots open, and if land is made available and there's some kind of interest in the site that can be proved that you're genuinely looking at developing a project there on site, there's lots of different pots open to you. So we've received locality funding to help us with our feasibility study for Lowfield Green. But also we've received unlimited funding for some other things. But these are just a few at the bottom. I'm sure there's lots more. I know Leah mentioned a few. But this just gives you an idea that there is support out there that groups can take on that part of the project. So this is our scheme that was just about to go in for outline planning. The plan is to build 19 homes. That's a mixture of 1 and 2 bed flats, and then 2, 3 and 4 bed houses. There's also going to be a community building, which is the common house. There's discussion about that potentially opening that out to the wider community. But there's other elements too. There's the laundrette. There's places where people can have those shared meals. Lots of car-free shared space in between those houses, and that's private and communal space too. We want to incorporate growing space. We want to try and encourage the community to come together. So that's the layout that will be submitted for planning. And this is our vision. This is what it could look like. We're planning to build with renewable construction materials. So we're looking at a straw bale panel system for the homes. We're talking about doing a community self-build with load-bearing straw for the building. I think in a rural environment, it's a real opportunity, if you're thinking about materials like straw, that you can have a real supply chain. You're surrounded by fields that produce straw. So it's quite an interesting concept, we think. This is our vision for it. We're really excited about this type of building. The way we've set your space up is that the amount of time it's taken us to get here, we've learned so much over that time, and we want to be able to pass that on. So rather than a straightforward co-housing group, we've set up this model that hopefully the real success in Lowfield Green will be that more groups are starting and more sites are being allocated, and we can give the council confidence and other landowners confidence that this is viable, a viable model that can deliver long-term, sustainable, affordable housing. So I'm unfortunately going to have to disappear, so I'm not going to be around later on, but if people have had a chance to come and speak to me earlier, that's great, get in touch. I'm happy to share any knowledge that we've got. We really want to see this type of thing succeed, so get in touch. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to tell you about our experience of building 3 houses for our community. Hudswell Community Charity I'll tell you a little bit about Hudswell first. We're a small village. We've only about 280 people, 110 dwellings, and we're a ribbon development. It's a working village, and we've got very few holiday homes, luckily. We haven't been bought out and people just come and go. We're only a short distance from Richmond, so we've got shops, etc. within a close. We've got one village hall, a village shop, and a church, which has just been closed. So the church is gone. But we have one pub which we bought for the community, and it's now the best pub according to CAMRA for 2017, and it's just won Yorkshire Best Pub for 2018. There we are. So Hudswell Community Charity was founded a very long time ago, 1672, and it was for the relief of the poverty and hardship in Hudswell, bags of coal, etc. We were endowed land, and eventually a school was built on some of the land, and that is now 3 houses that we were converted from the old school. So we've been we've had community houses since about 1920, and they're quite old houses, but they're very serviceable 2-bedroomed bungalows. when we decided that we were going to look at building some more houses, the structure of a charity was no good to us because we needed to be incorporated. We needed to protect the trustees if we borrowed money. So we became a charitable incorporated organisation, CIO. We've got 6 trustees who are all resident of the village, and we report annually to the parish council. We are also linked to the Church of England Ecclesiastical Parish, and one of our members always used to be the church warden of the village, but as we don't have anybody now, it will be the new vicar of Richmond when we get one, because he's gone as well. So at the moment we're running with 6 trustees and no church guidance.
No
so.
church, no vicar, but plenty of pubs.
Yes, that's right. Well, yeah. As you can see, meet in the pub. So the fields, we own two fields. One which is behind the houses the cottages that we've already got, and the other one is called Thompson's Field, which was endowed by a man called Thompson a long time ago, which we let to local farmers to graze horses for not very much rent. It's within the village bounds, and as we're a ribbon development, we could see, and has been thought of for many years, that it would be no objections to actually having planning permission granted. So many years it's been going on, and the money from the rent from the other houses has been building up, because we really can't give people that many bags of coal. Sure. So in 2014, we started to get this process underway. So we secured a grant of 10,000 towards the feasibility. We conducted the housing needs survey, which was really is the most important thing that you have to do. You have to identify a need. If you don't have a need, nothing else follows. You don't get the money from Jeremy. It doesn't really work, because you have to have a very good business plan to go forward. We commissioned an architect to design the scheme and to get us the planning application sorted. Hudswell's a strange village in that we're divided right down the middle. We're Richmond District Council planning on one side and the Yorkshire Dales National Park on the other, and we're in the National Park. So, yeah. So we looked at our monies, and we then negotiated with Jeremy for a loan, so we knew that we could get a loan, and we applied for some grant aid to support the development costs. And then this is when we decided we'd have to change the structure, and this took quite a long time. Why did we go for a housing development? Well, we had all this money, we managed 3 properties, and we'd identified from the housing needs survey that we needed some affordable housing. Also, we had this huge reserve, and the Charity Commission don't like you having lots of money and not doing anything with it. But to fulfil our obligations, we were very limited in what we could spend the money on. And we had the land, so we were very lucky that we didn't have to look for land or buy any or anything. It was sitting there. And so, again, it was the best way we could spend our money was to build affordable housing. So we had the all-important public consultation with the village, which has good points and bad points, and you have to have a very thick skin when you go into this, because there's always the people who don't want you to build the houses near them, spoiling my rural idyll, etc. So we spent quite a long time trying to meet the demands of the neighbours, which I think we have successfully done. They're all saying, oh, they look really good, so we've calmed them down, but as I say, very thick skin is required at the time. So this is a site, you can see the road goes up the middle. It's the blue site there, surrounded by other houses of a mixed, there's bungalows, there's houses, so. And you can see the field's a bit scrubby, not really think we've enhanced the look, actually. So the housing needs survey, what sort of houses did we need? We decided from the survey that we needed to build 2 3-bedroom dormer bungalows and 1 2-bedroom bungalow. So we now own 4 2-bedroom properties and 2 3s. So we wanted to have good quality build, green heating systems, plenty of off-road parking, because in a ribbon village, as you know, if you get any parking on the road, it's chaos, and Hudswell's full of cars, like a lot of villages. We wanted them to make them look attractive and to sit in the surroundings well. And we've retained the front wall and boundary and trees on the road. So the advantages to the village are that we get additional housing for people with a local connection. So it can be either way, to bring, say, an elderly parent to the village, or to help families who live in the village who need more accommodation, etc. So it helps us to sustain the pub and the shop. And initially, the architect came up with 5 houses on the site. Apart from the fact that we couldn't afford to build 5 houses, it just was out of keeping with the rest of the village, who, you know, all the houses have pretty well got space around them. So we could make that choice. We weren't being forced into it. And we will maintain control of the allocation. We had discussed going with a housing association, but everybody we talked to in the village didn't want anything to do with the housing association because of the fact that they would control who the tenants were. So we've maintained control of that, and we'll ensure they're well managed and maintained. So we received 7 responses. So that's not a bad number out of a small village. And during the past 25 years, our other 3 properties have been virtually constantly let. We had one come vacant 2 years ago. He'd been in his house 20 years, and he needed to move into Richmond because he couldn't drive anymore. So. And, of course, the National Park and Richmondshire stress rural housing for affordable rent. So as you can see, it does take a lot of time. We started in 2014, and it wasn't until early 2015 that we got the plans prepared and we consulted. In 2016, the planning application went in, and that was granted quite quickly. But we needed to sort out the Section 106 agreement, which actually the National Park one didn't actually allow us to bring people from, a relative from outside the National Park or the local area. So we had to go back to the National Park and get them to alter that so that it fitted with our housing criteria, which is very narrow. We went out to tender in October 2016, and by March 2017 we'd started on site, and they are due to be completed by the 4th of November. So it's gone very well. So the legal issues we had, as I said, Hudswell Charities Unincorporated, the land and property was held on behalf of us by the official custodian for the Charity Commission. So we needed to establish a CIO and link the charities by a vesting document. Then we needed to transfer the land ownership from the custodian to us. And we employed, with Hudswell Community Pub, which is a completely separate entity, we'd used Muckle. And because we were one of the first community pubs to set up, we had used their expertise. Now the documents that you need to set up and everything are all done by Plunkett, using a lot of the stuff that we had from Muckle. But it took a long time. that really, we were just about at the point where we could start just before Jeremy granted us the loan. So it was all very time consuming and, as you can imagine, pretty costly. So how's the scheme funded? Well, the total cost is 370,000. We got we had more than 80,000, but we needed to keep a reserve of money for ourselves. So we used 80,000 from the charity reserves. We got a loan from Jeremy of 250,000 over 25 years at 4% over base rate. And at that time, when we were looking at this, the community-led housing money hadn't really come into existence. So we were looking for this 40,000 shortfall when Madden came along and said, we've got this community-led housing, can we help? But, yes, please, thank you. And so that made it really possible for us to move forward. So the allocations policy. So the applicants must either live in the village and have lived there for a considerable period of time, 3 to 5 years. And if they've got close family members or parents, children, etc. living in the village, that's another reason they can move in. And if they work in the village, well, there's not that many people who are employed in the village. The pub's probably the only place, and a couple of farms. And they have to be in housing need. So we'll manage the properties. Nobody else can nominate the tenants. We'll use local tradespeople to maintain them, and we'll respond quickly to the maintenance and management problems, and build on the experience of managing the other three. We can never sell the houses. The land was endowed to the charity, and so therefore we can't sell them without the agreement of the National Bank, unless we fall foul of the mortgage company, and then we might have to sell if they let us. So we're providing affordable rent in perpetuity for the village. That's the plot. So there's two, the semi-detached are on the left. So you can see there's plenty of space around them, which we've landscaped. That's what they look like, stone and tile. Here's our chair digging the first sod with a very shiny spade, and our acknowledging the support from the council and Charity Bank. And that was the site on the 20th of March, and 6 weeks, on the 21st of April, that we were up to wall plate, which was quite amazing, really. The weather was brilliant. And that's where we are now. So they're nearly finished, and we have 3 delighted tenants who will be moving in on the 10th of November. And they're all very excited. It's a hard job, but it is well worthwhile when you see the delight on their faces at moving into a new property.
Right, well, hopefully we'll catch up a bit of time because my presentation is very short and sweet. As Sarah said, we've only just started. So we were commissioned 2 or 3 weeks ago to get started on this. This is what it's all about. One place where you can get help, advice, guidance and assistance. There's a lot of stuff out there. We've had lots of speakers today. We had other speakers this morning. There's masses of information there. You can get bamboozled by it all, so our aim is to try and get it all put into one place. It's largely about information, so we'll curate a library of information and links to other information so that hopefully everybody can come to the hub, as we're going to call it, whatever the new name will be. It will be one place where people can go onto a website or call us or email us, and we can point people in the right direction, help them to get through it all much quicker. So there'll be a bit of guidance. There'll be guidance on the ground from the rural housing enablers as well. There are other organisations out there. It's not just about us, it's about the whole mass of people who are going to be doing this stuff and helping you out. But there are so many people in this market and in this business, as you've heard, that we need to make sure that everybody gets to the right place quickly. We'll be collating these case studies that are on the ground, but also looking into other case studies around the country. We'll be trying to get some learning from those so that we can advise you and help you to look at other ways of doing things. So each project will be different. So by getting a good raft of case studies from around the country, you'll be able to read through those and see which one might be appropriate to you, or we can help you to look at case studies that might be relevant. There are many ways to skin a cat with this thing, many different models, many different delivery models, many different types of organisation that you can form, whether it be a cooperative or you're renting houses or you're selling them at a discount or whatever it might be. We'll put on some seminars which will be about how the hub will work, how we get this information, how we can employ consultants. So we'll be going around the region over the next 12 months giving presentations and involving you in decisions about how this works. The main thing as well will be a panel of experts. Now, how that will work might depend on which local authority you're in, where you're applying to grant for. Different bodies will have different rules about how you can employ people and ensure that public money and charitable money is spent wisely and get best value for money. So lots of safeguards around that which you need to navigate through. But our aim is to try and get a set of consultants together that you can either access through our website onto another body that has a panel of people, or we'll do our own, which might be more local-based people, particularly people who can help you get started. And this might depend on the scale of the project. If you've got a big project with masses of money and you're getting perhaps a housing association involved, then there may be a different type of panel because they'll need to satisfy their board, they'll need particular people who are going to be doing this work. If it's a local project like the Hudswell one, you might be able to employ a local architect, but if you're getting grant, it's not necessarily appropriate for you to just go to one architect and say, please build us this, because the charity or the grant funding body, we want to be sure that you are managing that money correctly, you're getting 3 quotes, but then you've got the problem of, well, how do I get 3 quotes? Which are the best architects to use? What do I need to take? What do I need to consider when I'm employing this architect? And we'll shortcut some of that work for you by making sure that these architects, these surveyors, these planning consultants will go through various checks so that we can recommend them as being appropriate for this type of work. So we're interested to hear in anybody who wants to be on any kind of panel or wants to get involved in this work. If you're a consultant, then you can talk to us. We can advise you about how you apply to get on these panels, which panels we'll be using, and this will be developed over the next few weeks. This is kind of how the panel will work. These are the types of advice we anticipate that we'll be procuring, which will be feasibility and technical studies, some of which might come through a locality, might come through individuals because you'll be getting the grant from somewhere else. So as I said, there's different ways of doing this. Planning advice, design and architecture, funding finance, types of finance that's available. So the whole raft of information will be available on the website and on the hub. And that's it. So hopefully you can quickly get your coffee. And I've been quite lucky in being able to give a short presentation. That's because we've just started. I'm sure that over the next year you'll see more of me and there'll be more to tell you about where it's going. So yeah, that's about it really. Thank you.
Quick canter through the process. As a community group, you might be at different stages of this process. You might already have your land, but you haven't got any sort of constituted group. Or you might have thought about the design and how you're going to build your properties, but you haven't got land and you haven't got any money to do it with. So this is the order I've put it in. It might not be the order that you're doing things in, but what I've asked each speaker to do is 5 or 10 minutes on that bit of the process, whether that will be the legal bits, the design, finding the land, getting your planning permission, all of those things. And the purpose of it is just for you to go away with 4 or 5 key things, welcome back, to think about, to inspire your groups when you go back to your parish council or your local group or your district council. So prepare to be inspired.
It's not often that lawyers get called inspiring, so I hope I live up to expectations. I'm not sure I will. Yeah, lots of other words, exactly. So I'm Laura Moss. I'm here from McGlee's Solicitors, and we're a specialist law firm. Can you all hear me, by the way, at the back? Yeah?
There's a microphone if you want it.
Okay, I'll try and not use it and see how I get on. We're a specialist law firm based in Leeds and Sheffield, and two of our specialisms are acting for private landowners and acting for community-led housing groups. So today is a pretty perfect match, really, for what we do. It's quite exciting to be here and see the two groups coming together. And we're going to talk about the stages of community-led housing, and I've put all the stages on the screen right there, but I'm actually going to focus on the first one, which is forming your group. So I think this whole next section is about the stages, but I'm going to focus on that first one. Those stages are how we see them. As Sarah said, you might do things differently, but to us, you form your group, you find the money, you find your site, you build the properties, and you move in. However, I also don't think you can see it as a linear progress. It's more of a jigsaw puzzle. So when you're looking at the very end thing, you're thinking about the moving in stage. That feeds into you forming your group and setting up your legal structure. So you can't view each step in isolation. You have to be thinking about all those things when you're working out what legal structure you should be. And that's what my job is. That's what I do at Wrigley's. I help groups set up their legal structure. So, in terms of forming your group, there are a few different things to think about. One is finding members, and that's really a case of finding people who share your interests. So that might be a group of people who come together because they're motivated to create affordable housing in their local area. Or it might be because your local area is run down, it's a derelict village, a dormitory village, and people are priced out, so moving to the city, and you might be motivated to create housing to keep people in your area. Alternatively, you might be driven by a motivation to set up a community of like-minded people who share the same values and interests. And we see community-led housing groups at Wrigley's from all across that spectrum. This photograph is something that's quite personal to me. It's Otley Community Land Trust, and I'm a member of Otley CLT, and happen to be married to one of the people in the photograph. I won't tell you which one. I was taking the photo, so I'm not in it. And our motivation, really, to give you an illustration, is the creation of affordable housing in Otley. It's a lovely market town, but it's very small, lots of land pressures, not very many brownfield sites to build on, and there's a real issue about affordable housing in Otley. So we're looking at creating affordable housing there. But we're also driven by shared values, so we're all quite outdoorsy. The photograph is next to a river because most of us quite like swimming in the river. So there's all sorts of different things going on there about why we've come together. So we've formed this group. Once you've got those members, the next stage is to look at creating a legal structure. And I think it's important to really question why you need to create a legal structure. And there's two main reasons. One is that it creates a separate legal person. So that means you've got something which is separate from the individual members, which can enter into contracts and which can incur liabilities. So members themselves aren't incurring liabilities. You've got some protection from liability. The second reason, apart from this legal identity and protection from liability, is actually credibility. We found personally in Otley that once we've got a legal entity and a legal structure, people are more willing to engage with us because they think we're serious. So, in terms of choosing what legal structure you're going to become, and that's what most of this talk is about, how you choose what legal structure to become. There are three main questions that I would ask a group. And I quite liked what the lady from locality said about put your form before the function. So it's all about working out what you're doing before you just choose what legal structure you should be. And these questions are really aimed at helping you go through that process. So the first one is who will benefit. Second question is where the funding is going to come from. And the third one is how the property should be owned and what it's going to look like at the end of the process. So in other words, it's people, pounds and property. I quite like alliteration. I was an English student, so it's who's involved, money, and then the property. And I'm going to go through each of these in turn to give you a bit more detail about the kind of questions you might ask yourself in each of those three areas. So in terms of the people, so that's who will benefit from your community-led housing project. Now, is it going to be the members? So is it going to just be the people who live in the community who will benefit from that community? Or is it more outward looking? Is it a wider thing where you might be looking at benefiting a local area economically, socially or environmentally? And that really is quite a fundamental difference between what you're doing. Who's going to control the community-led housing project? Is it going to be controlled by the people who live there? If it is going to be controlled by the people who live in the houses, how does that control, what does it look like? Is it going to be that each household has a vote, or is it going to be that everybody who lives in that household, one person, one vote? And there are different ways of doing it depending on how you want it to be. So, for example, you might have a community-led housing development where you have 40 houses. Some of the houses are one-bed flats, some of the houses are 5-bed houses. Is it right that the one-bed flat has an equal say, the same say over the housing development as the 5-bed house, even though the 5-bed house has got 5 people living there? Alternatively, is it going to be controlled by the wider community? So are you happy to have people who live in the area who don't necessarily live in those properties controlling what those properties do and how it's managed? And then finally, there's a whole question about what your aims and priorities are. And this goes back to what I was talking about shared values. So are you looking at creating affordable housing? Are you looking at creating affordability and perpetuity, which some people have touched on today and which I'll come back to in a few minutes? And these issues, really, the reason for identifying those at this stage is because that can affect what your legal structure might be. So the next question is this money about the pounds, where does the money come from? Are you looking at grant funding? Now James from your space mentioned a few of the grants available. We've got a list on our website of the grants that we know about that are available. If anyone has any that we don't know about, please let us know, because it's just supposed to be a helpful resource, that. So some grant funders require your legal structure to look in certain ways. A common requirement is that it has to be asset locked. And an asset lock is something that is one of those legal terms, and it effectively means that there's a limitation on what can be done with your assets. So some grant funders will only give you a grant if you've got an asset lock in your structure built in. So charitable status is an example of an asset lock, but you can have non-charitable asset locks too, and certain legal structures have those built in. If you're looking at raising finance by doing a community share offer or a community bond offer, and this is the idea. This idea is that you issue shares in your legal structure to people who live in the area, so they can buy shares from you. The issue of community shares is a very tightly regulated area, and if you're hoping to raise finance by doing that kind of public offer, so getting the general public to invest in you, you need to think about that at a very early stage of setting up your legal structure, because there are certain legal structures which work that way and certain ones which don't. So company limited by guarantee, you couldn't do a community share offer in there because there's no shares. Community benefit society benefits from exemptions to the legislation, which means that you can do a community share offer without having to comply with lots of the legislation around financial promotions. And then these are sort of individuals, so loans. Individuals who are going to live in your properties might loan you money, and that goes back to this idea that a legal structure has its own identity. So what we often do is end up putting in place a loan agreement between the community-led housing legal entity and an individual. So you have a loan agreement between the two. There's obviously also various other loans available from commercial lenders, charity banks here today. There's other specialist lenders in this area, local authorities sometimes lend in this area. And then finally, in-kind support, and that's things like being given land or being given sold land very cheaply or given it by a generous benefactor. It also might be professional fees or discounted construction materials and so on. So the most important two in terms of looking at your legal structure, I think the most important two on that list are the top two, like the grants and the community shares. And then finally, it's how the property should be owned. Now, I think this talk, I've not really got time to explain all the things on this slide, but it's really looking at whether, when you have your community-led housing development set up, is it going to be made up of people who live there as owner-occupiers? So perhaps the community-led housing entity owns the freehold and grants long leases out to the individuals who live there. When those individuals move out, they can sell and realise their asset. They can actually get money, it's got inherent value in their property. Or at the other end of the spectrum, is it going to be that the housing entity owns all of the property and the people who live there just rent, and when they move out they don't get any value back, it's just a rental system? And then somewhere in the middle of that you've got the rental model, shared ownership. It might be a hybrid. all those things sort of are relevant when looking at what kind of housing entity you're going to set up. And then the second 2 points about legal structure and perpetual affordability. There are lots of... Perpetual affordability is this idea that houses remain affordable in the long term. So you might sell a house to the first buyer at an affordable level. How do you ensure that when they sell on to the second person and then the third person and the fourth person, it stays affordable? And there are ways and means of achieving that. But if that's a concern for you, you need to think about that at the outset when you're setting up your structure, because it's not the world's easiest thing to ensure. And then what I didn't want to do in this talk was to talk through the different types of legal structure available, because I find that quite boring. I'm sure you would too. So this is all I'm going to say about it, really. What I would encourage people to do is to work through those questions I've just put on the slides. You can then choose the basic structure, and actually, at the simplest level, all you need to do is choose between a company or a society. And a society, societies can be community benefit societies or cooperative societies, but the fundamental, all the other things, community land trusts, charities, all the rest of it, sit on top of those two basic options, company or society. So once you've got that, you then look at what wrapper you want, and I use this concept of a wrapper because charitable status is a wrapper. I mean, there are unincorporated charities, but I think for this kind of project, we wouldn't necessarily recommend those. So in terms of incorporated charities, you're looking at, you could be a charitable company, you could be a charitable community benefit society, or like Hudswell, it's actually not on the slide, charitable incorporated organisation is a sort of slightly separate model. And then community land trust status is another example of a wrapper. And if you want to be a community land trust, you could be a company or a society, but you have to meet the legal definition of a CLT set out in the legislation. And then finally, once you've decided which of those wrappers, if any, you want, then you'd look at customising your rules to fit your particular circumstances. And then just finally, we've worked with community-led housing groups for a long, long time at Wrigley's, decades. And we have, particularly in the last couple of years, because there's such a growing interest in this area, we've worked with lots of groups in the early stages. So I did a bit of a whip round my colleagues yesterday and asked them for some top tips. Based on our experience of working with groups over the last few years, what advice would they give? So these are a lawyer's views of what community-led housing groups might think about in the early days. I think my number one advice would be to research existing models, and partly that's because it keeps the legal fees down. If you reinvent the wheel and try and do something really novel and have to rewrite all the documentation, the lawyers benefit, you know, and it just gets very expensive. We wouldn't say just go out there and copy existing documents, because we've seen groups do that, and you have to end up often unwinding things. But if you can emulate something that already exists, it does make life simpler. Take advice, obviously, from lawyers, but actually from people like Locality and Community First Yorkshire, and there's all these groups out there, these community-led housing hubs that are being created at the moment. It's a really exciting time, and they're just invaluable. So the more advice you can get, the better. We always tell groups to think like a developer, and it's basically to be a bit commercial about things. You don't have to share the same values as developers, but being commercial, we often tell groups to use land agents, because then they can actually get a commercially decent deal. You're going to be going up against the Barretts and Persimmons of this world, so you need to have the right people on your side to negotiate a good deal. Think creatively. So one of my property colleagues said that what the most successful cases she's seen have been where community groups have worked with landowners to come up with creative solutions, particularly around financial management. So it might be deferred consideration, so not paying for the land until the last house has been sold. And if you've got a friendly landowner, I'm sure there's lots of friendly landowners in the room, that can really help with your financial planning. Expectation management is just really being aware that these things take time, like time and money and energy definitely. And tied in with that is being resilient. So accepting that you're going to have to learn lots of new skills, and it can be really difficult at times. I was talking with Emma, one of my colleagues, Emma, is here today, and we were talking to a group earlier in the week who said that in the year before they moved in, they didn't have a board meeting at which someone didn't cry. So I think it was a cautionary tale, but she also said in the same breath, she said it was the best thing she's ever done. So I think she said she would do it again in an instant, but it was just a difficult process. So and I think she's a great example of resilience in that she loves living in this community. It was a second full-time job, she said, when they were building it, but they got there. And then finally, network, and we found this in Otley. So that's really just getting to know people who operate in this sphere, going to conferences like this, making friends with the local planning officer, talking to the local councillors, getting people on your side can be really invaluable. And as part of that, I think visiting, like I said at the beginning, visiting existing groups and learning from them. This sector is all about peer-to-peer learning, and because a lot of it's quite new, we're learning, and at the same time as groups are learning, so we're all in it together. So I think that networking thing is a sort of fairly good point. And I think that's it from me. Obviously, I'm around. We've got a stall in the back if there are any questions. And I think next we're going to hear about housing needs. Is that right, Amanda?
Hiding from the camera, you're all right.
So myself and Amanda are doing a bit of a double act this afternoon on housing needs information. We've not produced a presentation because we've got literally 5 minutes, so 2.5 minutes each to give you a whistle-stop tour of housing needs. So I'll kick off just by way of introduction. I'm Emma Whittles, the Rural Housing Enabler at Selby District Council. It's my colleague Amanda Madden, Rural Housing Enabler at Richmondshire and Hamilton District Council. The aim of the role of the affordable housing, the Rural Housing Enabler is essentially to deliver rural affordable housing across the areas we operate in, so it does exactly what it says on the tin. The purpose is talking to you about housing needs. I'm going to talk a bit about the process of how we carry out housing needs surveys, and Amanda's going to talk about some real-life examples of how the surveys have become real-life schemes. Annie mentioned in her last presentation that housing needs surveys are a bit like the business plans of development. I would really echo that they ultimately, you need the information from the survey to kickstart and shape the development. So in my experience of carrying out housing needs surveys, often a piece of land is brought to my attention and that triggers a need for a housing needs survey, and that will help shape what housing goes on there, what tenure, what type of product. Essentially a form is completed. We have a tried and tested form that exists across North Yorkshire and East Riding. It's a well-managed form that is a fluid document, so we keep it up to date with regular government guidance. This form is sent out to all people that live within a particular parish where that piece of land exists. It's also sent to people that have an interest to live in that particular area, so people who've got an interest to move back into the area. The form is sent out for a period of about 6 weeks, and people are asked to consider their current and future housing need over the next 3 years. And the key criteria is that people have a local connection to that area, so they're living, working or have family in the local area. So from that we can ascertain what local people and what the local need is. The report itself, or the survey itself, is valid for a 3-year period. And once the survey has been completed, the role of the Rural Housing Enabler is to write up a report which covers the results of the survey findings, which talks about what the tenure would be, the housing need would be, the numbers and the type of housing that should be on that particular scheme. We would feed back that report to the parish council or a community-led housing scheme and really talk them through and help them shape their development moving forward. And I think that's probably, I can hand over to you to talk about some real-life examples of...
I'm sure Annie told you how we worked together to do the housing needs survey at Hudswell, and we looked at meeting that need of 50% of the need what came forward. But you must understand that any survey is just a snapshot of that particular time. It can change from day to day. We have been lucky that we've allocated the houses at Hudswell, what are due to complete at the end of October, but we did look at the need, and some of the need what's come forward has been from hidden need. In a lot of the schemes that we've done, especially rural exception sites, which are equivalent to community-led housing, there is a hidden need out there. We built a scheme at, what shall I take an example of? Hutton Rugby, and we had a need for 45. We looked at building 16 units there, a mix of 2 bungalows, 3-bedroom houses and 2-bedroom houses, but by the time we came to allocate those houses, we actually had 91 households on that housing needs survey. So it is imperative that we keep those up to date throughout the process, throughout the build process, that we are keeping that names, adding them on, taking them off. Another scheme that we're looking at the moment, Astrid Foundation, we're looking at doing the scheme with them, and we've got the housing needs survey out at the moment. We've got a low response rate at the moment because a lot of those communities are still sceptical about some of the questions we ask and who's going to actually see the information what's brought forward. So we must make it a key priority that the information is confidential. Only a rural housing enabler will see that information, the names on those lists, until we come to allocating those properties.
And a key part of our role is sort of breaking down some of the barriers and misconceptions of what the surveys are about and what rural affordable housing is.
Yeah.
But that's for another topic, for another time. So, whistle-stop tour, so I hope you found that useful. I'll now hand over to Kester, who's somewhere behind there.
So I'm here to talk about, I was asked to talk about three things that when you're finding the right site, which is a challenge. If there's three things that I had to consider, my job would be a lot easier. But I focused on the three main things. I've not got a presentation because my presentation is quite short. The three things I focused on are the bits that probably cost you the most money or cause you the most problems. They're the things that I've decided to focus on in my talk today. The first thing to mention is when you've got your organisation set up and you know you've got the housing need, you're looking for the site. And you think, right, let's go and find a piece of land. The first key thing for me is access. Where is the site? How do you get into it? Is the site adjacent to the public highway? Is it adjacent to a highway that's wide enough to get vehicles in and out? Without access, you're not allowed to get planning, and you won't be able to buy the site without having to pay expensive amounts of money for someone else to provide access in between if there's a gap between your site and the highway. The other two things in terms of highways are both can you have visibility displays? So from a technical point of view, when you're exiting the site in your car, the highways officers want to know you can see both left and right for a certain amount of distance. That distance varies depending on speed limits in the area, from sort of a short distance of sort of 20, 30 metres up to sort of 100 or so metres if it's a sort of 60 mile an hour limit. And often if you're looking at sites on the edge of villages, you will be on the 60 mile an hour limit, the national speed limit. So that's quite important to make sure you get the access there. Certainly in certain locations such as the Dales or something like that, you'll have dry stone walls. They'll be quite high, they'll block your visibility. And again, they could be in third-party land as well, so they could be in someone else's ownership. So the key things to address there, firstly, have a topographical survey undertaken. So get a surveyor out there and actually work out where your boundaries are, where does it join the road, what else is in the way. Get them to also survey the wider area as well, so the highway and going down the street, so you know what you're doing in those locations too. Overlay your legal plan. So when you've done your legal searches, you know which piece of land you're buying, you've got the land registry document. Get your architect to overlay the legal plan onto the topographical survey again. Check the red line boundary adjoins the highway boundary. You can get a highway search done from North Yorkshire County Council. They'll tell you where the highway is. Make sure those two line up, because the last thing you want is a gap between those two things. And then finally, when you've got your layout drawn up, get the architect to plot on the visibility displays going in both directions. So again, you know that you're going the right way in terms of you've got the right visibility and sight lines in both directions. Once you know you can get access into your site, probably the next thing that can be quite expensive and quite challenging is drainage, and particularly in rural areas, drainage is often a major issue. You'll always find it raised that there's not enough drainage, or they've got flooding issues. People always raise these problems, and often you can resolve them. Foul drainage is usually fairly minor, and with surface water drainage, you'll actually have to attenuate the water on site, so store it and run off at sort of anywhere below 5 litres a second. So the actual outfall is usually minimal, so it doesn't have massive impact, but it's again making sure you've got an outfall. Where's it going to go? Is it going to your main sewer? Is it going to go to a watercourse? Does that system have capacity? And do you need to sort of pump the water? So, for example, if you're low down and the sewer is higher, you may have to pump out. That could be quite expensive as well. So just checking the topography of the site. So solutions there. When you're doing your topographical survey, obviously looking at the levels, but get the surveyor to actually, they can dip the invert levels of the sewers in the street, so you can see where your sewers are going to be. And then your engineer can give you advice on whether you can actually get into those sewers or not with gravity. You can also carry out what's called a pre-development inquiry with Yorkshire Water. So you can send off to Yorkshire Water. They'll tell you where the sewers are, both foul and surface. They'll tell you where they want the flows to go. They'll tell you if they've got capacity. Sometimes they'll give you invert levels as well, or a preferred location for your connection too. So again, speak to them. It's not too expensive, and they'll give you the details of where the sewers are in the area. And then one of the points is site conditions and the ground conditions there. So when you're looking at a site, you're sort of assessing it. You think, is it suitable for development? Is it too steep? So you can have sites that are quite steep, perhaps not around here, but certainly other parts of North Yorkshire, you get very steep sites. You can usually build on a steep site. You can have split-level houses and terrace gardens. That's fine. But again, from a highways point of view, highways will restrict the gradient because you've got to have safe access and egress from a dwelling. And if the site is too steep, you just won't be able to achieve that. You also need to look at what's gone on underground before. So maybe you can look at the historical maps and you'll see it's been farmed, forever. Some cases, again, more likely around here, you might have issues with mining, with subsidence. There might be reasons why it's not been built on, because it may be a historical landfill, or there may be archaeological constraints or restrictions that would prevent development from taking place. So you need to look into that and make sure you're not buying a site that has serious problems. Piling, for example, will cost you £6,000 or £7,000 a plot, and these costs soon add up when you're looking at limited resources to make sites viable. So to resolve those, again, the topographical survey is key, so get that done early on. That will tell you if you can actually develop the site. Engineers, architects will help you on the feasibility with that. You can undertake a phase 1 site investigation, which is desktop based. That's not too expensive. That will give you the historical maps, history to the site, sometimes even some sort of borehole logs from around the area. Speak to people who live there in the area. They'll know if they built an extension, what the ground was like, what the conditions were locally, and get some advice from there as well. And then finally, it's worth doing what's called a phase 2 site investigation, which is actually digging into the ground, finding out what's going on under there, seeing what's going on in terms of footings, foundations, contamination, that sort of thing, which is well worth doing. I suppose one final point that just relates to legal matters is probably more legal about the land ownership. When you're looking for sites, it's worth doing a title search with the land registry. Find out who owns it. If you don't know, if it's not local knowledge, you can do a title search. Often bits of land that we're looking at in villages are actually owned by people who live other parts of the country. They've been left it, or they've bought it, or they've moved away. It's a historical thing. So do a title search, find out who owns it, see if they want to sell. But also when you're doing that and you download the title, just look at the actual covenants, restrictions and things that may be on the title. Can they sell it? Does it prevent housing being built on the site? Other things like that can always cause problems and drag things out for a bit longer. And finally, just undertake some searches. You can do local searches when you're looking at land to make sure it's suitable for development. And that's really it. So I'll hand you over to Phil, who's doing his thing.
Right, I'm Phil Bixby. I'm a local architect based in York, run a practice called Constructive Individuals. I've experience over the years of working quite a lot with community self-build groups, which is why I'm standing in front of you. I only found about this gig on Friday, so consequently I've kept it fairly brief. The only animation will be my eyebrows. So can you see my eyebrows at the back? It's looking good. Okay. I boiled it down to 3 kind of essential things which I want to impart really. 3 points about designing your scheme. First is to really think about what you want before anybody does any design work. I can't emphasise this enough, that the better the brief that any designer gets, the better the scheme will be. And putting time into working out what you want before people start putting pen to paper is a sensible thing to do. Use narrative as a tool to explain things. On one of my schemes, completely unprompted, the client wrote me a day in his life, as it would be when he moves into the new house. In fact, some of the people here have been in that very house. Which was fantastically useful for me in terms of telling me how he wanted to be able to use the place rather than simply what labels on rooms he wanted. Develop ideas about what you want to be able to do, not just what you want. As I say, kind of room labels like kitchen, dining room, bedroom, all very well and good, but don't actually tell you that much about how the space is going to be used. So think about the stuff that you want to be able to do in the scheme that you're going to be living in, not simply the labels that you'll put on various spaces. Second thing is to make sure that you and your architect speak the same language. It might sound slightly strange, but architects, like most professionals, cloak everything we do in a kind of fog of technical terminology and our own special language, which makes us feel good and makes the work that we do seem special, but tends to mean that for normal human beings it's a translation exercise. So firstly, ensure you understand every word that they use and challenge them if you don't. I've heard of people coming out of meetings with architects where they'll kind of say, well, the architect said 5 or 6 words which never heard before, which sounds really great because you're getting good value for money there, but make sure you do understand what is being said. Make sure that the architect can work in ways which make design proposals easy to understand. You should not, as clients on the job these days, have to learn how to read technical drawings. Architects can work in 3D, they can explain stuff to you by walking you through schemes. And that should be the kind of level of stuff that you should be getting as a client on this kind of scheme. Ensure that both you and they have a common understanding of what good means. One of the things I always do with clients of mine is get them to start a scrapbook as soon as we start talking to each other of things that they like, whatever that might be, because my understanding of what is good and your understanding of what is good, certainly in terms of design, which is famously kind of subjective thing, might be wildly different, so make sure you share the same understanding there. The third big thing is to think about what you're going to want or need in 20 years or 30 years or 50 years and not just now. Think about sustainability and learn a bit about it. There's a load of information out there which you can research. Learn to look through the greenwash, to use one of those terms. Whenever I hear about schemes which are described as being eco-houses, my heart sinks because I think, what does that mean? And you need to be able to learn what that does mean and find out what it is that's being proposed for your housing. If your budget doesn't allow you to go for what you want straight away, then think about a forward pathway that allows you to get to a future scheme without undoing stuff that you've already done. So think about the future. You can't necessarily build to the standards you want to these days if you're working to a tight budget, but think about how you might get there in the future. And lastly, find out about recognised standards. As well as an architect, I'm a certified passive house designer, and passive house is one of those standards along with AECB Silver Standard and one or two other standards which you can Google and find out about, is an approach to the design and construction of buildings which ensures that they perform to a high standard now and into the future. Find out about them so that you can see what's out there, see what the choices are, and understand about it when your designer talks about it. And that's all I'm going to say in my 5 minutes.
So planning, I was thinking about this and how I was going to approach it, and I came up with the 3 C's: communication, and information. Not quite right, but still in mind. I think at the core of all of this for me is about communication, and that's both communication with the local planning authority, but probably more importantly, the communication that occurs with the local community, the parish council, and anybody immediately affected by the development. The developments that we've seen, certainly, I've lost Amanda now, certainly working with Amanda, the developments that have really worked well in terms of exception sites and affordable housing have been those where the community buy-in has been really high. You know, the problems that come up when an application comes in, and that's the first time that anybody has seen a scheme, they're the ones that fall horribly flat on their faces and don't go anywhere. The schemes that work really well are those where effectively the community have designed and are going to build them. So having that strong level of community buy-in, a sort of a partnership approach with the parish council, and ensuring that the views of those people who are immediately affected by the development are taken on board is absolutely crucial. After that, I think making sure that you follow a sort of a partnership approach, if you will, so getting the planning officers in the local authority involved from the outset so that you know what their requirements will be. They're able to point you in the right direction in terms of information, and we've certainly heard an awful lot about sort of the nature of information that might be in a planning application or might inform a development. Getting all of that information into a condition and a form that is consumable, both by the planning officers, but also by the community, by the local people, and by the members of the planning authority. You know, that's absolutely crucial. We saw in Hudswell earlier the beautiful image of what the buildings would look like when they're finished. Now, whilst that's not something that I require when you submit a planning application, boy, is that sort of quality of information useful when I put it in front of my members on a big screen in a hall like this. You know, having that sort of quality information, whilst it's expensive and it can be difficult to put together, it really, really pays dividends to have that information in a quality and a form that's really consumable. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jeremy Ince, and I'm Regional Manager with Charity Bank. For the past 10 years, I've had the privilege to be working with community groups to help them evaluate loan finance and make sure that it's viable as part of funding for community projects. So, a good banker, if such a thing does exist. So what is Charity Bank? Well, we're an ethical bank. And when I was speaking at the last conference, somebody stood up at that point and said, what does that mean, in a rather aggressive way? And what that essentially means is we're owned by charitable trusts and foundations. We only lend to charities and community groups. And the profits that we make are redistributed back to dividends to the charitable trusts that invest in us. So any money that we do make is invested and recycled within the charitable sector. And essentially our mission in terms of being an ethical bank is to support charities and community groups deliver their mission. So we make loans, not grants. And those loans typically range between 100,000 to 3 million. We have funded larger projects than that from working with other social lenders. What we do is mainly secured lending, although there's other lenders out there that do unsecured lending and loans for sort of early stage finance. It's long-term debt, generally up to 25 years. And we try and be creative and flexible in the way that we structure our repayment terms so that it meets the needs of you as developers and clients rather than the bank's rules and regulations. No penalties for early repayment, and it's local representation. We're a small bank, so it was interesting when Annie said, I got the money from Jeremy. Well, it actually wasn't my money, it was the bank's money. But because we're small, it's quite a personalised process, and all the negotiations, both pre-development, through the development phase, and subsequently are through me. So that all works well if you get on well with me, but not so good if you fall out with me in the early stages. So, yeah, we're open for new business and we're competitive in terms of rates and fees within the wider marketplace. What do we support? Well, we've heard about the different legal structures, and essentially everything that we've talked about today, we will fund. What we won't fund is anything that's not for private profit. You know, it's not just housing. We support specialist accommodation for the elderly, for those with mental health needs, those moving on from homelessness, as well as, you know, community sports projects and other charitable projects. Within housing, it's the land purchase, it's the development finance, and it's long-term repayable debt that might be funded from rental income, possibly, or other charity income. Again, it's loans, not grants, so it has to be paid back, I'm sorry to say. And as part of that, one of the big parts of my job is undertaking an investment appraisal with clients. So I remember having a discussion with Annie and the team at Hudswell in the very early stages when they said, well, Jeremy, we've got this idea, but we're not sure if it fits and how much debt we can afford. And we spent quite a lot of time, probably, I don't know, if I did it all up, maybe a week, actually talking about the costs of the loan repayments, what the rents would be, having allowance for maintenance, for voids in the property, you know, going through the numbers in some detail, which might well have been a painful process, but I think probably a bit like going to the gym, you come out leaner and fitter and better for it, and with a robust plan that actually we think this is all going to be affordable and it's all going to work. No lender will fund 100% of a scheme. So you're going to have to find some contribution, a deposit essentially. Typically, Charity Bank will fund up to 70%, so that's a 30% deposit which the community are going to have to find through shares we've talked about potentially, soft loans from members, soft loans from residents if it's going to be a community-led housing scheme, or that might be some grant funding through the community housing fund that we've heard talked about through local authority colleagues. We'll generally take a mortgage on the property, so that's important for the charity to realise and for the members of the scheme that if you default on the loan, then the bank has recourse to that asset. So it's not something to be undertaken lightly. So I've got various case studies, but I'm not, in the interest of time, I'm not going to run through those now. But what I would say is please come and talk to myself or other social lenders that operate in the sector, have an early stage discussion, and engage with us about the projects that you're thinking about undertaking, and we'll be pleased to talk to them about whether or not we think that a charity bank loan might fit as part of the mix. So thank you very much.
So for those of you who weren't here this morning, I work for North Star Housing Group. We are a registered provider, we're a housing association. And I've heard quite a bit today about why you might not want to work with a housing association, you might want to do it yourself, and that's absolutely fine. But what I wanted to say was that if you are not sure about all of this that you've been hearing and you actually want to partner up with a housing association or just get a housing association to build on some land that you've got, it's something that's worth considering. So working with a housing association in your community, just a reminder from this morning, we're not-for-profit organisations, we're charities, we're community focused, we're very transparent, we're highly regulated, and we're flexible, so we're very trustworthy, we're not fly-by-night, we're not going to disappear. Our housing association Endeavour's been around for over 40 years, and we're made up of Endeavour, Teesdale Housing Association in the Dales, and Darlington Housing Association, and we've got some stock in North Yorkshire, but most of our stock is in West Durham and the Teesside area. So there are loads of options as to how a housing association could be involved with any of you, and it's up to you to work with us to tell us what we can do with you, would be the spirit in which I would go into it. So it can be led by a community, or it could be supported by a community. And what I mean is the idea might come from yourselves, or it might be that we've got a knowledge that there's a need for some housing in an area, and then we'd like to work with a community. The phrase I used this morning was about being a good neighbour in an area. We want to be a good neighbour to people in the area. We're in it for the long haul. We don't want to go in and be seen as the big bad developer who everyone hates. We actually want to work with communities. We can do full development solutions, we can do new build, or we can do conversion of properties. We could provide development assistance to organisations as well, and I slightly hesitate on that just because we're a very, very small team, but why not? We could lend our assistance. Or we could just do a management and maintenance of stock for people. We manage 3,500 of our own properties at the moment, and we could just offer some of those services to help organisations out if that's what you wanted. So some of the various things that we in North Star do at the moment, we've got two co-ops and a tenant management organisation. We've got one small community land trust in Middlesbrough. We manage stock on behalf of small charities, trusts and other housing associations, people like Arms Houses, and another big housing association who've got some stock in part of the Teesdale area, and it just makes more sense for us to manage the whole estate rather than them manage part of the estate, us manage part of the estate. We own properties that we lease to others, particularly probably for supported housing needs. We have access to Homes and Communities Agency grant, because we're a regulated body. We actually have some grant at the moment, and I've got no land to build houses on, would you believe? So I'm out there talking to people looking for land that I can afford to buy at the moment. And we put our own borrowing into it. So we have a development programme. We have a board that wants us to build properties and to grow our asset base. But we only have a small development programme. We're a medium-sized housing association. We're not going to take over the world. But we are highly rated and highly regarded in the region, so we're nice people. And I think that might be the end. So yeah, just, if you want to talk to me or any of my colleagues about us working with your community, my cards are out there, and I've got some annual reports out there, and catch me afterwards.
Right, good afternoon. I'm Colin Huby. I'm the Rural Housing Enabler for Scarborough and Rydale. This is Emily Grogan, who's the RHE for Craven. We're just going to talk briefly about the allocations process. As RHEs, we get involved with development right from the very concept when development starts, whether it's a Section 106 site where you've got a mixture of market and affordable, whether it's a rural exception site, 100% affordable. So we're right in there at the very beginning, and If it's a Section 106 site, we work closely with the developer, and we carry it all the way through. You've heard about surveys, working with the communities, and when it comes to allocations, I think the most important thing is to make sure that the community are aware of when those houses are going to become available. Our strap line, as you can see, is local homes for local people. Every development has a Section 106 planning and legal agreement that goes with that scheme, and obviously in that Section 106 there is a detailed about eligibility criteria, and most people will follow a development, especially if it's a rural exception site, because we worked extremely closely with the community. Probably not so much with a Section 106 where you've got a mixture of market and affordable. But the important thing is to get the message out there when those homes are going to be allocated. A lot of people tend to sort of wait until they think their homes are going to be completed. And the important thing is to make sure that people are registered, they've applied for those homes well in advance of that completion date. Now, in Rydale, we, whether it's a Section 106 site or whether it's an exception site, we always hold an open day to publicise the homes. That's a typical example of a flyer. The RHEs work in communities of settlements of less than 3,000. So it is possible, and we've found that it works extremely well, is to actually flyer the whole village, the whole settlement. You know, when people get something through their letterbox, they tend to make more notice that an open day is coming up in advance of the completion of those homes. It's quite often parish-based, so if we deliver flyers to a village, we will also make sure that we include the outlying areas and farmsteads, so we post out flyers as well. And we make sure that we hold an event probably about 3 or 4 months into a build, so that people know that they have to get registered for those homes coming up. If it's social rent or affordable rent, in North Yorkshire we have, most authorities are signed up to North Yorkshire Home Choice, so, and that can take, for people to get registered, that can take up to 28 days. So there's no point people getting registered right at the end. They have to be registered and complete an application form right at the beginning. They might have to produce evidence about their circumstances. So when we hold such an open day, we make sure that people know how to apply for the homes when they come up, what criteria they have to comply with. It's not just rented. In Rydale we do an awful lot of discount for sale properties. That's where there's 100% purchase of a property direct from the developer. So we work closely with the developers. Again, that's a different form of application. So when people come to the open days, we give them all this information. We produce lettings information, so it's got the local connection criteria, which is often the case. Housing need information, what the property mix is. In fact, we put everything on there associated with those homes, so that everybody has, well in advance of the completion, enough information so that they can apply at that time, and certainly when the homes are being let. And that's an example of a discount for sale information. Again, for people who are purchasing a home, they need all that information right up front. For a discount for sale, they have to apply for a mortgage in principle, so that can take time. We have 2 principal lenders for discount for sale, which is the Nationwide and the Halifax. So there's an awful lot of time that needs to be spent up front. And as RHEs, that's what we do to make sure that people can apply at the right time and have that opportunity of getting one of those affordable homes before they're actually complete. So.
Colin's told you a bit about the allocations process and the letting side of things, so I'm just going to say a bit about the shared ownership side of things in open market properties. Craven's a little bit sleepy on this, so we actually take the hassle out of it by giving all our shared ownership units to a local estate agent to market instead. We'll provide information to them such as construction plans to show the layouts, really good architects' designs to show bathroom layouts, kitchen designs, floor coverings, as much detail as we can get. Prior to the estate agent marketing the properties for us, we actually approve all the right move details and the marketing of brochures. And that's because we like to make sure that all the local connection criteria are on there at the top, and any staircasing restrictions that apply to the properties, so that anybody who's interested in buying can see right away what they're looking at. Once marketing starts, we've found over the past few months that the best way to do it is to go through a number of checks before applicants actually start to view properties themselves. So in the first instance, applicants will be sent through to myself to check any local connection criteria that might apply. So for example, if their connection is through employment, we'll require a letter from a local employer, or if it's because they already live in an area, maybe rented, and they just want to buy, we can check that through council tax records. We've also, over the past few months, started to make sure that everyone who does want to go ahead with a purchase has to register with what we call the local Help to Buy agent. And the Help to Buy agents make sure that anybody who comes forward for a shared ownership or sale affordable property qualifies under the government guidance, which is set out in a very, very thick, big document, please don't look at it, called the Affordable Housing Capital Funding Guide. It's as interesting as it sounds. So, for example, just to summarise, there's a few key points, but it basically makes sure that anybody who earns over £70,000 here in North Yorkshire wouldn't qualify for a shared ownership home, for example, and they've got to be first-time buyers. That's two of the key summaries. And Help to Buy approve those two key criteria for anybody that comes forward to buy a property. Just to tell you a bit more about what Help to Buy actually is, Help to Buy are government-appointed agents who specialise in shared ownership, marketing shared ownership and other affordable products. Each region has a Help to Buy agent allocated to it, and you can basically sign up to their terms and conditions, and then you're allowed to advertise your affordable sale properties on their website. So they're really good at targeting people who might not look on Rightmove for an affordable property, but might go straight to their local Help to Buy agent instead. And they take the hassle out of it in some respects, because they do all the checks that perhaps you don't have time for, or we don't have time for. Once they've got approval from the Help to Buy agent, we then require the applicants to speak to one of the Help to Buy's approved mortgage advisors. We like them to have a mortgage offer in principle to make sure they can actually go ahead and buy. But the Help to Buy mortgage approved agents also come forward with this, which I've got copies of, and basically to go ahead and buy, everyone who buys a shared ownership property has to have completed one of these through their financial advisor. And it says straightforward, it calculates income against expenditure. With shared ownership properties, when they buy a share of that home, they also have to pay a rent, and this just makes sure that, one, they're buying the maximum percentage share they can buy in the property, but also that they can afford the rent. Yeah, so once we've got Alex's approval, the Help to Buy agent's approval, and any local connections being checked, we then basically sell the house as you would do any house on the open market. So we base it on a first come first served basis, so the first person over the line with all those three documents is who we'll move forward with first and foremost. And we always sell the maximum share. You legally have to sell the maximum share, I believe, so you can advertise a 50% share in the property, but if Alex comes back and says this person can afford 60 or 75%, that's the percentage of the share in the property we'll sell. So I do have copies of the shared ownership calculator and a Help to Buy application form if anybody wants to see it, please do that.